Would you please state your name, spell your last name for the record for me, please?
Yes, my name is Eric Bartelink, ERIC. Bartelink is BARTELINK.
And how are you employed, sir?
I'm a professor of anthropology at Chico State University and co-director of the Human Identification Laboratory.
And what is the Human Identification Laboratory?
The Human Identification Laboratory is a forensic anthropology facility, and we provide services to law enforcement throughout the state of California on the recovery and analysis of human skeletal remains related to death scenes and crime scenes.
Okay. And talk to me a little bit about what is forensic anthropology.
So forensic anthropology is a subspecialization of biological anthropology, and it's specifically focused on the analysis of human skeletal remains, including things like estimating sex, age, ancestry, stature, and also things like defects on remains related to trauma, identification methods, and scene recovery of human remains.
Now, you mentioned identification. Would that include situations where there's been suspected burning of the corpse?
The identification part's more about establishing the identity of a deceased person, but we do specialize in the study of burned remains and other postmortem alterations to the body.
Can you tell me a little bit about your educational background?
Yes, I have a BS in anthropology from Central Michigan University, a master's in anthropology from Chico State University, a PhD in anthropology from Texas A&M University.
Are there certain board certifications that you are required to participate in as part of this specialty?
Although it's not required, it's strongly recommended that practitioners become board certified. And I am board certified by the American Board of Forensic Anthropology since 2012.
Okay. Are there any affiliations or organizations that you're associated with or participate with?
There are several, and while these are not qualifications, these are indicate participation in the field. So I am a fellow of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, and I am the chair of the Organization of Scientific Area Committees Forensic Anthropology Subcommittee.
And how long have you engaged in the practice of forensic anthropology?
I have been involved with forensic anthropology for about 21, 22 years.
Have you done any publications or research?
Yes, I have published many articles and book chapters, as well as books related to forensic anthropology and other areas of biological anthropology.
And in regards of training of your specialty in terms of fire-caused issues related to the burning and fire, what sort of training have you had in that capacity?
So, throughout my education, I have learned about burned human remains through coursework and trainings and workshops. But I have personally assisted on over 100 burned remains cases. I assisted with like World Trade Center identification efforts, which involved a lot of burned remains. And so, and our team is the main team who does fire victim recovery for wildfire victims in the state of California.
Okay. Okay. Now, you spoke previously about part of your organization is to help law enforcement agencies. Is it primarily your position in aiding law enforcement agencies, or do you help in defense cases as well?
We don't discriminate between whether we work with the prosecution or the defense. So we have assisted the defense in cases where we thought we could provide useful information and perspective about a case.
Okay. Okay. And how have you testified before in front of a court?
I have.
And how many times have you done that?
I think it's around 7 or 8 times, and then I've had other depositions.
Okay. And I think I've asked this before, but I'll ask it again. Is there any specialized knowledge or training that you would be required to have as part of your title as a forensic anthropologist?
Yes, you'd have to be a specialist in the anatomy and biology of the human skeleton. You would have to be able to identify postmortem alterations, including burning on human remains, and be able to properly categorize those modifications. And you have to have expertise in how to identify evidence of skeletal trauma on human remains.
Okay. Okay. Judge, I previously had marked Defense Exhibit 136. My understanding, and I won't speak for the state, but my understanding is the state has no objection to the admission of 136.
We do not, Your Honor.
All right, and Exhibit 136 then is offered and admitted. Can you explain what the exhibit is, Mr. Pryor?
The exhibit is Dr. Bartelink's report, Judge.
Thank you.
And Judge, for ease of use, and for me and probably everybody else, I'd like to utilize the Elmo. My understanding is the state has a copy of the very document as well, and I'd like, for purposes of publication, to use the Elmo device to publish.
Okay, if you'd like to publish a conforming printed copy of the exhibit
Okay.
on the Elmo without objection from, if there is no objection from the state, you can publish it that way.
Your Honor, we have no objection to that.
All right.
Now, Dr. Bartelink, you were contacted by my office for what purpose?
We were asked to analyze the skeletal remains of Tylee Ryan.
Okay. And I'd like you to go through the process of what steps you took to conduct that review and investigation.
Yeah, so me and my colleagues, Dr. Colleen Milligan and Ashley Kendall, came up to Rexburg, Idaho, and did an analysis of Tylee's remains on December 18th. We worked with the Rexford Police Department to unpack Tylee Ryan's remains and to sort them into anatomical position on a table so that we could conduct an analysis. We performed an inventory, which is a tabulation of all of the bones that were present. We also filled in a skeletal diagram indicating which portions of Tylee's remains were present and absent. Because she was already identified, we did not conduct an estimations of sex, age, etc. But we did conduct a trauma analysis by examining each bone to look for any kind of defects or modifications. And we also recorded the pattern of burning across the skeleton.
And the length of time in order for you to do this was approximately how long?
We conducted this in the span of one day, and it was 3 forensic anthropologists working together. And so we were able to conduct that work in approximately a 6 to 7 hour period between the 3 of us.
Okay. So 18 hours of between the 3 of you approximately.
No, total of about 6 to 7 hours with us working all together simultaneously as a team.
Okay. So but the 3 of you were all engaged in work at the same time, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So, and those folks were associates with your organization, is that correct?
Yes, they are professors that work with me in the Human Identification Lab and are professors at Chico State University.
Both PhDs.
Correct.
And both have similar experience and training and as you have, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Now, as part of your review and investigation, you prepared a report, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And I'm not going to go into every word in the report, but in essence, as part of your investigation, what did you discover in regards to the inventory of the remains?
We found that there were certain areas of Tylee Ryan's remains that were absent, and this included large parts of the vertebral column, most of the left and right arms, and large portions of the legs, kind of from mid-thigh down towards the ankle on at least one of the legs.
And Judge, could I utilize the Elmo device at this point?
Yes.
So I'm showing you a illustration from your report, and there is a laser pointer up there somewhere, if you can find it. And then off to your left is a large screen. And if you could just go through in general, the areas that you found were not present at the burial site of Tylee Ryan, and just basically describe each one for me, if you would.
Yeah, so the way that this skeletal diagram is labeled is On the left side is a front view of the skeleton, and on the right side is a back view. Anything that's colored in black was absent, which means we could not identify those portions of the body in the inventory. So we were missing a little bit of the skull from the left eye socket, a little bit here from the back of the skull. And then if we move down towards the limbs, we're missing almost all of the right arm except for just the shoulder and a small piece of this forearm bone right here. We're missing almost the entire left arm except for the shoulder. We are missing most of the ribs, but we were not able to label those individually because we could not determine which rib was which because they were burned and fragmented.
Okay, I'd have you stop there for just a moment, and please forgive my interruption, but when you say fragments of the ribs, is it your testimony that the majority of the rib cage was missing?
I wouldn't say the majority, but a large portion of the ribs were not represented in the inventory.
Okay.
Mr. Pryor, I apologize for the interruption. Could I have a quick sidebar with counsel, please?
Excuse me, Doctor. Judge, may I proceed?
All right, yes, apologies for that interruption on the sidebar. You can continue, Mr. Pryor.
So I think we were at the last, we let off, we talked about, I think my comment was the majority of the rib cage, but you said instead it was a large portion of them.
That is correct.
Okay, and then can you continue with your pointing out the different remains that you were unable to locate?
Yes. So as we move down, we can see that from about the mid thigh area, these are the femur bones, all the way down to just a little bit of the top of the shin bone here, the tibia bone. No bones could be found from those areas. And we had a little bit of the right leg here, missing this section down here. And then on the left leg, we have almost nothing represented from that leg, except for a few small fragments. So we're missing fairly large portions of the skeleton.
You're missing large portions of the skeleton.
That is correct.
Now, you are an expert in the area of forensic anthropology. And you mentioned that you are involved in the recovery as it relates to wildfire victims in California as well. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And that you have, and I don't know how to talk to you about this, but the part of your job is scientific testing of remains and the impact that they can have with fire. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And you conduct experiments in that regard, right?
We have done some training exercises and colleagues of mine have as well, where we have experimentally burned a willed body donor.
Okay, and I'm going to stop you there. What that is in a situation where someone has identified on their donor card that they would be willing to be part of a testing, scientific testing, and that's how you obtain the body to engage in your testing. Is that correct?
That is correct, and these are for training exercises for law enforcement and for search and rescue personnel.
Okay. And explain to me the process of what you did to run these tests of the will donor body.
So these tests typically involve kind of building what sort of looks like a funeral pyre out of pallets.
Okay, and when you say a funeral pyre, are we talking about a small brush fire?
It's usually multiple pallets, probably around 4 or 5.
4 or 5 pallets.
Yeah, to create enough fuel to burn the body.
So this is a large fire.
Correct.
Would the expression a bonfire be appropriate?
Yes, it would be, similar in size to a large bonfire.
Okay. And would it be
Your Honor,
possible?
at this point, I'd like to make an objection and ask for a quick sidebar.
All right, we'll have a sidebar. All right, at this time, the court's determined we need to make a evidentiary ruling and do that outside the presence of the jurors before we proceed further with this. So The jurors will be asked to just please stand up if you would and line up out in the hall, and we don't need a full break. I don't think this will take very long to get through, but we do need to take up that matter, and I think the most efficient way is to do that. So apologies for the inconvenience, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, but if we could have you please exit the courtroom, we'll take up this evidentiary matter.
All right, please.
All right, thank you. Please be seated. All right, Mr. Wixom, I understand the state had an objection to this stage of the testimony. If you'd like to lodge the objection, you may.
I'm sorry, Your Honor.
You can go ahead. I understood the state was proposing an objection to this particular line of questioning.
We are, Your Honor, and for the record, we are objecting to the line of questioning with regard to the experiment that it appears the witness is attempting to go into. The basis for the objection, Your Honor, is that while we did receive a 27-page report from this expert, nowhere in the report that I can see did it reference the particular experiment that's being talked about. The biggest concern the state has is under Rule 16, we're entitled to have a summary report of his conclusions, including the data and facts upon which he relied. When we received this report, we provided it to our two experts and had them look at the report in preparation for their own testimony. Certainly, I'm prepared here today to respond to and to deal with the conclusions in the summary report as provided, but we didn't have an opportunity to have our experts consider the way and the methodology that he may have used in this experiment we didn't know about in preparation for a potential cross-examination here, nor in preparation for the calling of our own witnesses. And so for that reason, as to the line of questioning, any reference to any experiment, we would object to that being admitted at this time.
All right, and if you'll give me a moment, I'm just briefly reviewing through the report. And so that was admitted as Defense Exhibit 136. And your proffer to the court here, Mr. Wixom, is that contained within that 27-page report, there's no mention of an experiment regarding fires. Is that what you're saying?
That's my understanding, Judge, and I believe that's been confirmed off the record.
All right, response, Mr. Pryor.
Judge, this was part of a training exercise to show how he analyzed and determined burn marks, deciding when and where a corpse and how it was burned. So if the court would like me to rephrase it, instead of rephrasing it as an experiment, I can rephrase it as a training in order to help aid him and his organization in making the determinations that they do as part of this. I'm not suggesting in any way at this point the manner and type in which the remains of Tylee Ryan were burned. What I'm suggesting, Judge, is this was a training exercise that his organization engages in as part of his wildfire training, and that he's describing that this is the methodology that they use to do that in this particular isolated incident. I don't think it's necessary in that situation. This report would be 100 pages if I had to put in every training exercise this expert has engaged in to gain the knowledge that he has.
Okay, so to be clear here, you're referencing as part of foundation or his basis of expertise that he's done this type of training before, but what you are not intending to proffer here is some specific evidence relating to a scientific experiment that would apply to the remains in this case. Is that what I'm understanding?
That's absolutely right, Judge. This is a foundational question that deals with Dr. Bartelink's experience and how he makes determinations in terms of folks who are victims of fire.
Okay. Any further argument or response from the state?
Judge, with that proffer, the state would withdraw the objection. It wasn't referenced in the report, so we didn't have a proper understanding. But if it's limited to that purpose, we withdraw the objection.
Okay, and I would find it proper in terms of foundational for expertise to be established under Rule 702. And so with the state withdrawing that, we'll go ahead. If that's where the testimony is heading, Mr. Pryor will let the jurors back in. Of course, if it were going into a realm of some specific experiment that took place relating to the evidence in this case, then likely the objection could be renewed, and I would then issue a further ruling.
And Judge, for clarity with the jury, I think what I will do is rephrase experiment, and with the defense or with the state's permission, I'll use the word training, and that might alleviate any confusion the state might have with where I was going.
Okay, and I think that would help clarify things. So thank you, counsel. We'll go ahead and have the jurors brought back in, and you can continue with your line of questioning, Mr. Pryor.
Thank you. All right.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bailiff. Please be seated. All right, Mr. Pryor, if you'd like to continue on your direct, you may.
All right, and Judge, I'll start with Dr. Bartelink. We were talking about a training that you were participating in terms of utilizing a donor, a willing donor, and engaging in the intentional burning of that donor for purposes of scientific training. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is part of a training course.
Okay, and can you elaborate on what that encompassed?
So essentially setting up something that would be similar to a funeral pyre, but having multiple pallets stacked and cutting out sections of those pallets. So you'd have pallet underneath the donor as well as on top. And we're trying to achieve a certain level of burning in the study. And so it requires the use of a fair amount of fuel source. In this case, it was the wood pallets.
Okay, and when you're talking about a fair amount of fuel source, is that a significant amount of fuel source?
You need combustible materials, and so a body does not easily burn without having combustible materials. And so using wood is an effective way of achieving a large fire to reduce a body's mass down to the bones.
You used the expression funeral pyre. That would suggest a sizable fire.
Yeah, like a large bonfire.
Okay. And would the use of just gasoline, would that obtain the same result?
So typically accelerants don't generate enough fuel. They burn away quickly, so they don't generate enough fuel to sustain combustion of a human body for a long period of time. So usually you need other types of combustible materials.
And in regards to in regards to a funeral pyre as such, so if I understand you correctly, just the use of gasoline on a donor corpse would not achieve the burning to obtain the results you're looking for.
In my experience, no.
Okay. It would have to require a significant amount of when you say, I think you used the term fuel, that would be wood.
Could be wood or other types of combustible materials.
Okay. Okay. Something that would burn easily
That's correct.
in a large quantity
That's correct.
to generate a significant fire
Yes.
over a long, prolonged period of time
Yes.
to obtain the same result.
Yes.
Okay. Now I'd like to go back, if we could utilize the Elmo again, Judge.
Yes, you may.
You pointed out in black on this illustration all of the remains that were not present when you did your review and investigation. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Would the use of a fire be the explanation as to why you didn't have a complete skeleton?
Only partially. So there were bones that could not be identified to a specific skeletal element, but there was so much missing that was not accounted for. So I believe there are a large amount of these remains that are actually missing, but a small amount are bones that I could not identify what they were.
So you reviewed the testimony of the excavation of the site with a bulldozer. Is that correct?
I did review the reports on the excavation of the remains.
And that they used a bulldozer and took care to try to locate all of the remains. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
And yet they didn't have the remains.
I don't know where the missing remains are, so I can't comment on
Okay.
that.
But in fact, you don't have all of the remains, correct?
That is correct.
And you believe that the remains could not be determined to have been burned out or disappeared as a result of a fire. Is that correct?
Not entirely, yes, that's correct.
And there are bones missing.
Yes.
Okay. Significant amount of bones missing, right?
Yes, you can see from the skeletal diagram, everything in black was not identified in the remains.
Now, I want to continue with your report. Were you able to make a determination as to whether the body was burned as being intact?
Based on the burn pattern, I do believe that the most likely possibility is that the body was burned as a whole, not in pieces.
Okay. And would it be fair to say you can't make a determination as to the length of time it would take to burn the body?
We could only provide sort of minimum timeframes, but there's, how much fuel is used, the size of the body, and other factors all can alter those parameters.
So there's no definitive way to determine how long it took to put Tylee's remains in the manner in which they were found. Is that correct?
That is correct.
In addition, there were some fragments, and I want to use the word fragments because in the fire pit, there were some objects that were removed from the fire pit. Do you recall seeing that?
Yes.
Are you able to determine what type of fragments those are?
Most of the bones that were in the fire pit lacked diagnostic characteristics, so they could not be identified as being either human or animal.
Right. So we don't know what those fragments were. Would that be fair?
That is correct.
Okay. You noted that there was a canine mark on part of the remains of Tylee. Is that correct?
That was not something that I noted, but had been noted by the anthropologist with the FBI.
Okay. And do you recall the location of that canine mark offhand?
I believe it was on one of the shoulders, so where the shoulder connects to your shoulder blade. I don't remember if it was on the left or right side, but it's we made those observations and did not see evidence of scavenging, but sometimes making those determinations is very challenging.
Okay. And I said canine, I meant carnivore.
Yes.
So we don't know when a carnivore may have made those marks on the body. Is that correct?
We do not, and I'm not certain if they're carnivore marks or related to the burning process.
Okay. I want to talk to you about whether you can make a determination as to where Tylee Ryan's body was burned.
I cannot make that determination.
So in other words, you can't make the determination that her body was burned on Chad Daybell's property. Is that correct?
I cannot make that determination.
And you can't make a determination as to the day or time that the body was burned. Is that correct?
That is correct.
What you can make a determination is that the body was burned intact to your best opinion. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And you can't make a determination as to whether the body was burned and then at subsequent time placed in Chad Daybell's backyard. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Judge, I have nothing else at this point.
All right, that'll conclude the direct examination then. Mr. Wixom, I presume will be doing cross, is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
Good morning, Dr. Bartelink.
Good morning.
And am I saying that correctly? It's Bartelink?
You pronounced it perfectly.
Yes, thanks. So, Dr. Bartelink, you've already, I think, shared with the jury that in preparing and in conducting your own analysis of Tylee's remains, you looked at the autopsy report that had been done on Tylee. Is that true?
That is correct.
Likewise, I think you've indicated that you did review the FBI reports from Dr. Angie Christensen and a report from Dr. Halapaska. Is that true?
I did, yes.
Okay. And you have a professional relationship, or at least a collegial relationship, with Dr. Angie Christensen, don't you?
That is correct.
In fact, I believe you both published something together.
We are co-authors on a textbook.
Okay. So is it fair to say that she is a colleague that you have respect for?
Judge, I'm going to object. Witness bolstering.
Sustained.
When you reviewed her report and Dr. Halapaska's report, didn't you indicate in your own that when you compared your findings with theirs and with the autopsy, that you found no substantive difference in the analysis of Tylee's bones?
That is correct.
And you were asked a question by the defense about the ability to estimate a time with which it took to burn Tylee's remains. And I think you concluded that that's not possible. Is that right?
There are just too many variables that are unknown, so I would not feel comfortable making any kind of determination.
In fact, in your report, wasn't that a question that you were specifically asked by the defense in preparation of your analysis?
Yes.
Okay. And the question was, can you burn Tylee's bones within a 2-hour period? That was the question.
That was the question, yes.
Okay. And as I recall from your report, you said it's possible, but you can't determine that. Is that fair?
That is correct.
Likewise, I think you were just asked a question about the ability to determine whether or not Tylee's remains had been burned on the Daybell property. Recall that question?
Yes, I believe I do.
And I think you answered that it's not possible to make that determination, correct?
That is correct.
So is it fair then to say that it may well have been that her remains were burned on the Daybell property?
Judge, objection, offer speculation.
Well, overruled.
You may answer.
It's certainly possible that she could have been burned on the property, but it's also possible that she could have been burned elsewhere.
Fair. I think you indicated that there were, no, you've already indicated that not all of the bones from Tylee's remains were found by the FBI or the search who conducted it, correct?
That's correct.
And you can't tell whether or not all of the bones have been entirely burned out because you don't have all of the bones. Is that fair?
Yes. In my experience, we still would expect to find large portions of the bones that were missing even after the burning process has completed. But there are some bones that were just too fragmented to identify. So some of those could just be those bones, but there's still quite a lot not accounted for.
Yeah. And didn't you indicate in your report at some point that it's possible there are still bones that remain on the Daybell property?
It's
Judge, objection, speculation.
Overruled.
That is a possibility.
And just to be clear, it's true that there were many of the remains that you analyzed that were subject to thermal damage, correct?
That is correct.
They had been burned.
Yes, that's correct.
And in fact, you had found a number of the remains to have had blunt force trauma. Is that correct?
That is correct. Blunt force defects consistent with perimortem trauma.
Yes. And with respect to defects, in fact, didn't you find that I believe the left mandible, I'm going to call it the jawbone if that's not correct. Let me know.
That is correct.
Okay. That the left mandible had been fractured. Is that correct?
That is correct.
I think in 6 different places.
I can't remember the number of places, but there were fractures to the left side of the mandible.
And you did determine that that had been from a blunt force trauma?
Yes, although unable to tell if it's before or after death.
So you can't make the perimortem versus postmortem distinction, but you still believe it was blunt force trauma?
Correct.
Likewise, I think you determined in your analysis that there was blunt force trauma on the skull, the sternum, and the ribs. Is that right?
That is correct.
And there were sharp form defects in the innominate or the hip bone. Is that right?
That is correct.
The sacrum
That is correct.
and the cervical spine.
The ones on the cervical spine are possible sharp force defects, but could not make a definitive determination on those.
And with respect to the sharp force defects, you did indicate that you can't exclude as some of the instruments that may have caused those to have been either a shovel or a pickaxe, correct?
That cannot be excluded. I believe I provided a long list of possible implements.
And in fact, I think you confirmed that some of those traumas could have been from a chopping force. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you indicated a machete may have been used.
That can't be excluded.
And I think finally, you had indicated that there had been some rib fractures. Is that right?
Yes, I believe there were at least 2 rib fractures documented in the report.
And you likewise believe that they were likely caused from blunt force trauma?
Yes, consistent with blunt force trauma.
Finally, I think in your report, you indicated that there were approximately a total of 18 sharp force defects in Tylee's bones, as well as a minimum of 16 impacts that were possible perimortem impacts on Tylee's bones. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you, sir. Your Honor, I have no more questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Wixom. Mr. Pryor, you can conduct redirect if you'd like.
And thank you, Your Honor. There is no distinguishable way to determine the location, I mean, the specific place where this blunt force trauma took place, is there?
There's not.
Judge, I have nothing else. Thank you.